Live look at the U.S. Capitol today, just days after lawmakers passed and President Trump signed a short-term spending plan that reopened the government after the record-long shutdown. But that deal only funds most agencies through January 30th, and that will come quickly. The real focus now shifts to what happens next. Lawmakers still have to pass most of the full-year appropriations bills. Without them, we are right back at another shutdown deadline. Both parties are gearing up for a fight over health care subsidies and other policy attachments that could make any funding bill harder to pass. The Senate's 60-vote threshold means even routine funding can stall, raising the odds of last-minute brinkmanship. Let's search for some answers now with Dr. William Resh, the chair of Georgia State's Department of Public Management and Policy. Welcome to the show. Thanks for helping us sort all this out.
Thanks for having me, Cheryl.
Okay, so we've just come out the other side of the longest shutdown in U.S. history. How fragile is this funding agreement that's currently in place?
I'd say extremely fragile. There's no promise from the House whether or not to hear or to stage a vote in respect to the Senate vote that was promised. And so there's a lot of uncertainty around that. There's a lot of uncertainty as to when a Senate vote would actually happen and exactly the details of the Senate vote that they agreed on.
So a deal's in place, but still so much limbo. You hear the phrase just kicking the can down the road a little longer, because the question is Washington any closer to solving the root causes of these budget standoffs, or are we just delaying the next crisis?
We definitely have not solved the root cause, which is the level of partisanship and the gridlock that we have in terms of a hyper-partisan Congress. And the irony is that the length of this shutdown cuts kind of both ways in the future. On the one hand, it should have taught everyone how damaging and unpopular these things are. But on the other hand, it may have convinced a couple people on both sides that brinkmanship works for their side and can be tried again. And so the January deadline, when it comes around, which lesson these people took from this will tell us a lot about the risk of a repeat in January, particularly if the ACA subsidies are not restored to the Democrats' liking.
Yeah, you just mentioned the ACA subsidies. This is critical because it is how much people pay for health care. And we've seen that could double or more for a lot of Americans. The last shutdown fight centered heavily on that. Could they become the kind of issue that derails funding, even if there is bipartisan agreement elsewhere?
Oh, I think so. I mean, it's a major issue for the Democratic caucus. The subsidies in and of themselves, whether or not they're resolved, will not automatically cause a shutdown, but it'll certainly hang over the next funding cycle. And in that sense, I think ACA subsidies are really going to be the center of the debate. They do raise the temperature quite a bit, making, another standoff in January quite high. So we'll see. But even, whether or not something happens with ACA, there are other concerns that the Democratic caucus has over the way the Trump administration is dealing with, or let's say managing the executive branch. And so other issues could certainly arise in the meantime.
When we talk about the health care issue, we saw Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had been so staunchly in President Trump's camp for so long, really move to a more central position, saying that we have to, as a country, think about a way to help people afford health care. Do you think in these kind of critical 10 weeks you might find a little bit more of a central, should I even dare say, compromise when it comes to this issue because of some key Republicans raising those questions?
Well, the ACA in itself is a fairly centrist model of policy. If you go back to the 90s, it's actually quite close to a model that the Heritage Foundation had proposed in the 1990s. The Republican Party has certainly shifted to the right on this issue since then. But the subsidies that Americans enjoy through the ACA are, substantial. And these people will vote with their wallets in many respects if their healthcare costs go up. And so, whether or not a compromise, as in shifting the policy towards a Republican preference, it's unclear at this point exactly what the Republican preference is. There hasn't been a healthcare plan really articulated on that side.
Sure. Before we go, we have about a minute left. We don't want to lose what we saw to be the day-to-day impact in so many people's lives, not just federal workers, but SNAP delays, food banks overwhelmed during the shutdown. How did those disruptions shape public trust in government, and how could it shape the next deadline that we see, and how our lawmakers work through it?
Yeah, I mean, even though the government has in fact reopened, the damage from the shutdown doesn't vanish overnight. It's not as simple as just turning the lights back on. Agencies are going to be facing huge backlogs. Households from federal government workers went weeks without pay, but people who received benefits like SNAP had those benefits reduced. The confidence in the federal government as a service provider has taken a real hit. And so those effects are going to play out for months, whether it's delayed services, slower data, or even the quieter decisions by people who might not decide to work for government or might leave government as a function of these huge shocks to their household incomes. And what gets lost, I think, is, it takes a long time to unwind disruption. So for every furloughed day, that creates a stack of postponed inspections, late benefit decisions, missed deadlines, et cetera.
All right, really important to think about those impacts for everyday Americans, and January 30th is the next deadline. We always appreciate your insight. Dr. William Resh, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Cheryl. Have a lovely day.
Yeah, you too.